Critical to any criminal investigation. A suspect might lie or tell the truth. They may be innocent or guilty. Interrogation is a high-stakes game. Too much pressure, and an innocent person might confess to a crime they didn't commit. But if the truth isn't discovered, a murderer could go free. So how does an interrogator get to the truth? New technology can scan our bodies and may reveal the telltale signs of deception. Research tells us what body language and speech patterns can indicate lying. Using actual interrogation footage, we will see how two detectives use the science of interrogation to solve murder cases.
I killed that little girl that night.
When a crime is committed, the police bring suspects in for questioning. A suspect is only interrogated if the police believe they're involved. If the suspect has committed a serious crime, like murder, they're probably not going to answer questions truthfully.
Do they pay you enough?
The challenge for the interrogator is to know when they're being lied to. But this is no easy task. Being able to lie is a fundamental human skill. It's part of what makes us human. We know that we're often lied to, but that doesn't make us great lie detectors. Maureen O'Sullivan is the professor of psychology at the University of San Francisco. She's carried out extensive research into people's ability to detect lies.
There was a recent study of lie detection, and average accuracy is about 54%, where chance is 50%. So most people are not good at telling when others are lying.
The study included law enforcement officers, but many of them are no better at detecting lies than the rest of us. Stan Walters is an expert on interrogation. He's published books on how to detect deception and runs courses for law enforcement officers on how to improve their interrogation skills.
See, you're acting. What happened?
Not all law enforcement officers receive this additional training.
You also got to remember you're dealing with a psychopath. McNair's good.
Walter's years of experience interrogating suspects in criminal cases have convinced him that we can become better lie detectors.
It is possible to become a better lie detector, to do a better job at spotting people who are trying to deceive you.
Stress will have an unseen emotional change that will trigger a change in behavior.
He believes the key to spotting lies is understanding how stressful lying is.
Lying puts a great deal of stress on the person who proposes to lie. A lot of emotional stress, cognitive stress, that's betrayed in the verbal and nonverbal behavior.
The stress of lying can change a person's normal body language. Walters calls these changes deception cues.
The cues that appear to be those that have the highest link with deception are those movements around the face that are called negation, covering the eyes, nose, mouth, ears, or too long shaking your head, protesting too much, or aversion of the body turning and moving away from the interviewer.
The stress of lying can also affect a person's speech.
You think I don't know that I would be on camera if I went there?
Those verbal cues that are signs of deception include such things as something called cognitive dissonance, where there's extreme stress in the mind and the message becomes lost in the transmission.
Yeah, he was with a few people.
The other cues are those in a large category called denial. Convenient memory lapses, overselling the statement, trust me, believe me, honestly, qualifying statements, indirect answers.
Look, I don't know. I go there every night after work.
These are cues that the subject's attempting to mislead the interrogator.
So he was working for
These changes in body language and speech are not the only deception cues to look out for. One of the greatest challenges facing the liar is concealing their true emotions.
Darwin believed, and we believe also, that there are a few basic emotions that are hardwired, and that if you are emotionally aroused, this whole package just fires. And most people are not fast enough or good enough to track it. And you're going to get micro expressions where the person is attempting to control their emotion, but they're not able to. So it flashes on the face in a 15th of a second or a 30th of a second.
During the O.J. Simpson trial, one witness exhibits a micro-expression.
We're going to watch a video clip of Cato Kalin. He was a house guest of O.J. Simpson. Cato Kalin is being questioned about whether or not he has a book contract.
That you have a book proposal out.
As Marcia Clark talks with him about the book deal, he denies it.
You don't have a book proposal.
But he is having to control himself. You can see the clenching of his jaws. He denies it again. But as she gives more and more details about the book deal, he realizes that the cat's out of the bag.
You don't have any book proposals out?
No. Don't want to do book.
What's of interest is very early on in the interview, a very flick on his nose
Yes.
of anger, disgust.
Yes.
As you look at his facial expression, when it is slowed down, you can see that he's showing an extremely strong expression of anger or disgust. That was just a flick in real time, unless you've been trained to recognize microexpressions.
Yes. Yes.
Later in the trial, evidence was presented of a conversation between Kalin and a publisher about a book contract.
How long have you known John?
Spotting deception cues in a suspect's body language, speech, and emotions helps an interrogator get to the truth. Stan Walters also teaches that an interrogation should be carried out in 3 well-planned phases.
And the objective is to try to get as much information as possible, but at the same time making sure that the content is accurate.
Phase 1 establishes a rapport with the suspect.
Did you play baseball? I played in the second pro league when I was 17.
The second phase draws out their story.
Walked around and fell back right here on the coffee table.
In phase 3, their story is challenged.
That I have some concerns about the story that you told me.
Using actual interrogation footage, we'll see how these interrogation techniques were used to solve 2 murder cases. In each of these cases, the interrogation of a suspect was critical for solving the case. There was also no forensic evidence linking the suspects to the murders. The interrogations were recorded and shown at the trial of the suspects. Case 1 began on the 1st of September, 2003. Nicole Frederick was caring for her 2-year-old stepdaughter, Anne-Marie Shawley, at their home in Detroit, Michigan. In the morning, Nicole Frederick could not wake Anne-Marie up. She was rushed to a hospital emergency room with a severe head injury. The hospital suspected child abuse and contacted the police. Lieutenant Victor Loria was assigned to the case.
There were people that were obviously very, very upset because of the condition that Anne-Marie was in, but I noticed right away that Nicole Frederick did not appear to be displaying any emotion concerning the condition of the child.
Frederick's lack of emotion singles her out for Lieutenant Loria. He believes she may know what happened to Anne-Marie and plans to interrogate her. In the second case, 40-year-old Carmen Ross lived with her 4-year-old daughter Kiara in Lawrence, Kansas. Carmen was planning to move to California to get married and start a new life. Her ex-husband, Thomas Murray, a 48-year-old English professor at Kansas State University, opposed the plan. Murray lived in Manhattan, Kansas, about an hour-and-a-half's drive from Lawrence. On Friday, the 14th of November, 2003, Carmen was found beaten and stabbed to death in her home. Detective Doug Woods of Douglas County Police Department was assigned to the case.
I observed Miss Ross laying on the floor, deceased. The living room was in quite a bit of disarray. Furniture had been turned over. There was a lot of blood on the carpeting, on the ceiling, on the walls.
Detective Woods' first task was to inform Carmen's ex-husband, Thomas Murray, of her death.
When they knocked on the door, I told him that I needed to speak to him about an issue, but I told him that his wife had died. Well, his first response was, "Do we have to do it right now?" He didn't show any reaction or any emotion to it. Did want to know what happened, and that's the oddest reaction I've ever gotten.
When Detective Woods first spoke to Thomas Murray, he was not a suspect, but Murray's unusual emotional response made Detective Woods suspicious. He asked Murray to come in for questioning. In both cases, detectives want to establish if their suspects had anything to do with the murders, but they don't start their interrogations by asking questions about that.
The first phase of a successful interrogation is for the interrogator to establish a constant or baseline for his subject's behavior.
In the Nicole Frederick case, Lieutenant Loria starts the interrogation by sharing a meal with her.
What I'm really trying to gauge is a baseline for her behavior. How nervous is she? Does she appear to be withholding anything, or is she aggressive? Just so I know kind of what range she's going to function in. And that went on for a few minutes, but you can see how she relaxes very early on in the interview because it's non-confrontational.
You guys have plans for today? Pretty much take it easy.
We have a couple of hamburgers and some French fries together, and that is a great way of developing a relationship with somebody because typically we don't eat with total strangers.
In case 2, Detective Woods observes the baseline behavior of his suspect, Thomas Murray.
And I've been in this town this is my 16th year, so I don't know why you have this look of familiarity about you.
We just spent a Labor Day weekend out here playing softball.
Initially, we built a little bit of rapport with me. We just got some basic personal information, so there would really be no reason to be dishonest or, tell a lie about your name, your date of birth, where'd you go to college at, those kind of things.
By the time I quit playing baseball, about 18.
Did you play baseball? I played in the semi-pro league when I was 17.
When the detectives feel they have the measure of the suspect's baseline behavior, they begin the next phase of the interrogation. In the narrative phase, the suspects are asked to explain what they did on the day of the murders. In the Nicole Frederick case, Lieutenant Loria begins the narrative phase of the interrogation. He asks Frederick how her stepdaughter, Anne-Marie, got her injuries. But even though he suspects her answers are deceptive, he doesn't challenge her about them. The purpose of the narrative phase is to get as much information as possible.
But it's nothing uncommon for her to look like she was run down,
Little kids get bumps and bruises.
But yeah, but she's way beyond a normal little kid. I mean, she's like real clumsy,
The most serious injury to Anne-Marie is a blunt force trauma to the head, which has left her in a coma.
And she lost her balance and fell back right here on the coffee table, which I'm sure probably eventually came along, but for one right here, I don't know about.
One of the ways an interrogator tests a suspect's emotions is to ask a question that requires an emotional response.
I asked Nicole Frederick the question, what do you think would possess somebody or motivate them to do this to a child?
I don't know. I honestly don't really know.
And initially, she gives me a good response. I don't know. Considering the injuries, the level, very good response.
Like I said, I don't really think that someone did it.
But then after that, she follows it up with, but I don't think somebody did this to her. That all of these injuries, burns, scrapes, bruises, blunt force trauma, that all occurred around the same time, happened by some series of accidents.
Frederick fails to show either outrage at Anne-Marie's injuries or a desire to find out who caused them. It's another example of a suspicious emotional response. The detective investigating the murder of Carmen Ross, Detective Woods, begins the narrative phase of his interrogation of her ex-husband, Thomas Murray. As he asks Murray questions about the murder, he spots an important body language cue concerning his hands.
Initially, I think he was trying to hide his hands from us. That was one of those things, you just kind of notice those things. And that definitely came into play later on as those questions progressed.
You have any cuts, scrapes? Oh yeah, take a look at this.
And he would lay out his hands, and there were some cuts on his fingers.
Look at that.
Well, how did you get these cuts on your hand? Well, I got These cuts on my hands from cleaning out the gutters. I got this cut from where I was cutting up a fresh pineapple.
Instead of pressing Murray about these injuries, Detective Woods leaves the room and watches him through a two-way mirror.
Mr. Murray is looking at his wrists, he's looking at his hands, and he tries to start reenacting how these bruises may have happened. And he's bouncing his wrist up and down on his knees like he was playing with a child.
This is the perfect time for the interrogator to watch the suspect in unguarded moments. Many times you'll see them working through in their mind how they're carrying out an act, sometimes either mouthing their statements or verbally rehearsing the statements. There's been moments where they've apologized under their breath, or in this case, Thomas Murray literally acting out an explanation for injuries.
I'm still, now you've got me really wondering about these, and the only thing I can think of, and this is going to seem kind of lame, but I know yesterday I was playing with Kiara like this, among other things, and she had me do it for a long time, and maybe that bruised it.
As Murray talks to Detective Woods during this narrative phase, he offers explanations for a whole range of evidence that might place him at the crime scene.
When you go in the front door, you head slightly to the left, there's a bathroom in there. When I was there on Tuesday, after the mediation, I washed my hands in that sink, dried them there on the towel. You'll find a drop of my blood on that towel. Guarantee it.
Murray goes even further. He offers an explanation for why the blood of his ex-wife Carmen might be found in his car. He says that 2 weeks earlier, he was visiting his daughter Kiara at Carmen's house. Kiara was ill, so Carmen drove to the local pharmacy. Murray told her to take his car because he'd blocked her car in when he'd parked in the drive.
While on her way back from the pharmacy, she got what he called a gusher of a nosebleed. And she was trying to stop the bleeding. She was reaching over the seat while driving, trying to find a box of tissue in the back to do something about the blood coming out of her nose. He explained to us that her blood would probably be on the steering wheel, would be on the back seat, in the back seat area, on the console, the gear shift, all these items which she might have touched.
I washed my hands in that sink.
Murray comes up with these complex stories to explain away any forensic evidence from the crime scene, even though the detectives don't present any evidence to him.
I'm just saying, I was picking at this cut when we were, well, I know, but here what
The real power of the narrative phase is that without knowing it, the suspects Thomas Murray and Nicole Frederick have walked into a series of traps. In the next phase of the interrogation, these traps will be sprung.
Yeah.
In the final phase of the interrogation, the interrogator challenges a suspect's story by focusing in on areas where they believe they are being deceptive. They also seek out evidence that contradicts the suspect's version of events. Lieutenant Loria starts the cross-examination of Nicole Frederick by challenging her claim that no one injured 2-year-old Anne Marie.
There's a couple things that we know for sure, okay? That Anne Marie was hurt and that somebody hurt her,
Right.
okay? That there's absolutely no way that this is from a fall, from standing on the couch or falling on the couch. Somebody in that house last night hurt that little girl.
When I first walked into the room, I told her right away that I had some serious concerns about what she was telling me and that I didn't believe that she had been totally truthful with me. I covered with her that the initial statement that she didn't believe that somebody had done it to the child was ridiculous, and she actually responds and starts to nod her head yes. That explanation was ridiculous.
In the interrogation room, it's not only suspects that lie. It's legal for an interrogator to lie to a suspect in order to put pressure on them. Lieutenant Loria chooses to use a subtle deception on Frederick.
Well, the deception I used in this case was to explain to Nicole Frederick that the injury to Anne Marie's forehead would be examined by a forensic pathologist.
I don't know, she's got an injury from somewhere, and it's just a matter of time before I find out what the injury exactly looks like and match it up with something in your house.
Okay.
And that's gonna, point me in the right direction.
But you can see her response right away is, like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And I could see that in her nonverbal behavior.
Lieutenant Loria has attacked the credibility of Frederick's story. He now softens her resistance to telling the truth by using a psychological technique called theme development. Typically, the interrogators suggest to the suspect a reasonable explanation for why they may have committed the crime.
I've never met you before today, okay? But I can tell in the matter of the few hours that I've spent with you that you're a good person.
The use of themes is a very, very powerful technique because it allows the person a way to justify to themselves why they did certain things. And obviously in a case like this that involved a murder and a murder of a 2-year-old child, that's a significant obstacle to overcome.
What happened? They didn't even
And if you can
realize.
come up with the right theme, people will seize on that. And that's what Nicole Frederick did. When I explained to her that, you know, she acted out of character and that her intent was not to murder this child and it wasn't pre-planned, she jumped on that and thought, this is my way out of it. And immediately she said,
I was taking her to the bathroom because she peeped in the room, and she stopped at the doorway and was gagging, like she's gonna throw up again. So I pushed her, I was like, go.
and in the interview, you'll see how she just makes a very, very slight kind of pushing motion. And she said, I kind of, you know, helped her along, and she fell forward and hit her head on the toilet.
So I pushed her, I was like, go.
She might have done it a little harder than what she thought.
When I pushed her too hard, and she hit the toilet. But I didn't mean to do that. I didn't shake her, so when I did put her on the bed, I may have caused her heart injury.
But when you examine those injuries, the explanation does not fit the level of injury.
Lieutenant Loria believes his use of theme development helps him get his first major breakthrough. Frederick admits pushing Anne-Marie into the toilet, causing her head injury. Detective Woods takes a different approach to challenging a key aspect of Thomas Murray's story. He decides to investigate Murray's explanation for why the blood of his ex-wife Carmen might be found in his car. Murray claimed Carmen had driven his car to the pharmacy because he'd blocked her car in the drive. On the way back, she'd had a nosebleed.
Looking at the residence here and the garage area, it's obvious that there's quite a bit of space for someone to turn around. And Mr. Murray's story that he had pulled in directly behind Carmen's car and blocked her in didn't seem to be, at that point, a real credible story.
Detective Wood's suspicions proved to be well-founded.
Later in our investigation, we discovered a receipt for the medication that Mr. Murray claimed that Carmen had come to pick up. Mr. Murray had used his credit card and signed the credit card receipt paying for that medication on that evening. He described that Carmen had come to Walgreens.
Murray had fallen into a trap. None of Carmen's blood was ever found in his car. His attempt to outsmart the detective had backfired. Uncovering Murray's lie was an important breakthrough for Detective Woods. Nicole Frederick admitted she'd pushed her stepdaughter Anne-Marie into the toilet, causing her head injury. Lieutenant Loria decides to investigate her story by visiting the family home.
I'll never forget walking into that bathroom. I looked into the waste paper basket, and there were wads of duct tape and just gobs and gobs of human hair. And the following morning, I asked her about it.
And what's the explanation? There could be a wide variety of them, right?
They did play with it. They do play with it.
And her best explanation was that the girls were wrapping the duct tape around their wrists, playing Wonder Woman with it. Well, anybody who has young kids and knows what duct tape is like knows how sticky it is. And kids are not going to put duct tape around their wrists and play with it.
We know that there's burn marks on her that are consistent with cigarette burns.
The cigarette burns on this child were something that could not be explained. And when I confronted Nicole about that, she had extreme difficulty in explaining how those burns actually got there.
I didn't burn her. I cigarette. And they just woke up.
Lieutenant Loria's interrogation techniques are exposing her deception. But can he find out the truth? The investigation of the suspects is beginning to get startling results. In the Nicole Frederick case, Lieutenant Loria is close to finding out the truth. In the Thomas Murray case, Detective Woods used information he got from Murray to show he was being deceitful. Detective Woods now exposes an important failure in Murray's emotional response.
I understand that, and you knew something bad had happened to your wife. When I came to your house and told you your wife had died.
After several hours of interrogation, Detective Woods decides to tackle Murray over his failure to ask how Carmen died.
That she didn't die of natural causes. I knew that at the front door. We sit here and we talk, and you have yet to ask me what happened to your wife.
Why wouldn't you ask me what happened to your ex-wife? I think it's a natural human instinct. I think everybody wants to know the circumstances.
I knew that she didn't die of natural causes.
You never asked me. Maybe you already know what happened.
I was deducing that this is not, you don't send 4 police officers to tell somebody his former wife has passed away.
For Detective Woods, it's a strong emotional cue that Murray is involved in Carmen's murder. The cross-examination of Thomas Murray does not produce an admission from him of his guilt.
I didn't do it. I did not kill Carmen.
But despite his denials, evidence from the interrogation leads to him being charged with the murder of Carmen Ross.
Today, the judge ordered Murray to stand trial on first-degree murder charges.
The interview with Mr. Murray was played for the jury during the criminal case proceedings. And I think the jury got to see exactly what was going on.
I had bought a fresh pineapple and was cutting it apart and sliced into my hand.
Detective Wood's 10-hour interrogation of Thomas Murray was critical in securing his conviction for the murder of Carmen Ross.
We, the jury, find the defendant Thomas E. Murray guilty of murder in the first degree.
There was a huge relief that, okay, we did it. We did the best we had. We put the best case we had together, and he was, we got him.
Thomas Murray has appealed his conviction to the Kansas Supreme Court. That appeal was pending at the time this program was completed. Lieutenant Loria's cross-examination of Nicole Frederick reaches a critical point when he exposes a key failure in her emotional response. Frederick never asks about the welfare of her stepdaughter, Anne Marie.
One of the things that you never asked me, and you've asked lots of questions during the interview, is one question, and that's, how's Anne Marie doing?
I was asking you that all yesterday, and you kept telling me you didn't know, they don't tell you, so I stopped asking you.
I don't remember you ever asking me that last
Yeah,
night.
I asked you what her injuries were, what was going on, and you said you didn't know.
I can tell you this, okay? That for all intents and purposes, Anne Marie's brain dead. Okay?
Oh my God!
And
what do you mean she's not gonna come out of it? She's dead?
She's not official.
It was at that moment that she realized that how gravely she'd injured this child. And I'll never forget it, because her response to it was not, oh my God, that poor little girl, I can't believe this has happened to her.
Oh my God, it's not me to do it.
But she thought, oh no, how does that affect me? And her response was, oh my God, I'm gonna go for murder.
When you found her in the morning, and she was non-responsive, did you shake her then?
At this part of the interrogation, Nicole Frederick admits that she's responsible for Anne Marie Shawley's death. And her first statement is, I killed that little girl, but she had her hands over her mouth in an attempt almost to prevent those words from coming out. It was quiet, and I knew that the videotape was running, and I knew I had to capture that on videotape. So I replied to her, what?
What?
And it's at that time that she drops her hands down and clearly states,
I killed that little girl that night, didn't I, baby?
moment, I'll never forget it. I've taken other confessions on very serious crimes, and usually the response is absolute elation. But I remember sitting across from her and looking at her and having the realization at that moment that I was looking into the eyes of the devil, except for he was in Nicole Frederick's body. My theory on what occurred that night was that Anne-Marie woke up at around midnight and she had an upset stomach. She woke Nicole up and Anne-Marie ended up vomiting on the carpeting. And that made Nicole absolutely furious. She brought Anne-Marie into the bathroom, and it was at that point that I believe the assault started to occur. I believe that Nicole rammed Anne-Marie's head into the toilet, and when the child started to get loud, that's when she used the duct tape to silence the child. And that she was just so furious and hated this child so much that that's when the torture continued.
Lieutenant Loria obtained Nicole Frederick's confession after a 6-hour interrogation over 2 days. The taped confession was shown at her trial, along with evidence from the family home. Frederick was found guilty of the murder of her stepdaughter, Anne-Marie Shawley, and sentenced to life imprisonment. Lieutenant Loria and Detective Woods achieved their results in the interrogation room without resorting to strongly coercive methods. But their approach is by no means universal, foolproof method of detecting deception.
For many decades, man has been trying to find ways to employ technology as a tool to spot deception. This has been the holy grail of the science of interrogation.
The first lie detection technology to be invented was the polygraph in 1917. It measures changes in physiology, which are caused by the stress of lying. In this simple demonstration, the subject is asked to write down a number and then lie about which one they wrote down. In this case, it is the number 9.
Was the number that you wrote down number 12?
No.
Number 11?
No.
Number 8?
No.
Was the number that you wrote down number 9?
No.
What I detected on the numbers STEM test was that Kelly was reacting to number 9. Was the number you wrote down number 9?
No.
There is a reaction in the cardio trace in the red line. There's also a reaction in the GSC trace in the green line. And the suppression in these trace markings in her respiration. A clear indication of deception. Continue looking straight ahead.
The ability of the polygraph to detect deception has been extensively researched.
Take any drugs or medications?
Accuracy varies between 50 and 90%. For this reason, polygraph evidence is rarely accepted in a court of law. Recently, efforts to find a foolproof lie detection technology have gathered pace. Some of the most cutting-edge technologies are being developed and tested at the Defense Academy at Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Welcome to the Defense Academy for Credibility Assessment.
Researchers at the Academy have created a virtual interrogator, an avatar. It allows them to test the effects of changing the gender and look of the avatar in their lie detection experiments.
Good morning, Dr. Denver. Thank you for agreeing to talk with me today. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Please answer yes or no to each question. Let's begin.
In this test, a subject is asked a series of questions while an infrared camera records minute changes in temperature on their face.
Are you over the age of 17?
Yes. You're looking for temperature changes to questions of interest.
Are you now in South Carolina?
Yes. And temperatures increase a little bit when someone has gotten a little nervous about a question?
Do you sometimes drink water?
No. Usually they're just very minute, tenth of a degree changes that occur for a few milliseconds. They rapidly come up and then they rapidly go away back to a baseline.
Are you now on Fort Jackson?
No.
When Dr. Denver lied to this question, the computer correctly identified the deception by picking up the minute changes of temperature in his face, which are not visible to the naked eye.
If John Denver was answering that question to a border crossing guard, there could be a consequence to that. That might have meaningful information to that investigator, and they might say, John, we're going to take you over to this other room. I want to ask you a few more questions.
The interview is now over. Thank you for agreeing to talk with me today.
Not all the latest technologies rely on measuring a stress response to lying. This technology tracks the movement of the eyes when we look at human faces.
You look at pictures differently if they're familiar to you than if they're not familiar. If it's a familiar face, they will focus in on the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And if they're not familiar, the gaze pattern diverges. The brain keeps saying, no, get me more information. Get me information around the hair, give me the ears, give me the chin, get me as much information as I can.
This technology could be used in missing persons cases. A suspect could be asked if they recognize someone. They might say that they don't, but their eye movements might betray that they do. None of these lie detection technologies are completely reliable. They all have their flaws. Those which rely on measuring stress responses might be fooled by the fact that people can experience stress even when they are telling the truth. Also, some people can lie without showing any stress. Even the eye tracking technology could be tricked by someone simply controlling their eye movements. But what if we were able to look even deeper into the human physiology, at the source of all truth and lies, the human brain? Researchers at Columbia University in New York have devised an experiment to see if the brain functions differently when we are lying. The magnetic resonance imaging machine measures increased areas of activity in different parts of the brain. In the experiment, a volunteer is placed in the MRI scanner.
So we're about to begin, Bobby. Are you set?
Yes, I'm ready.
He's then asked to tell a story in his head.
Begin the truthful story.
The first story is truthful.
Stop the story. Rest.
The second story is false.
Begin your deceptive story.
As the subject tells the story in their head, every part of their brain is scanned. The results are revealed later, once the images have been analyzed.
What we see in this map is that there are a number of colored areas. And these colored areas are areas where the computer has told us that there is a very, very elevated signal during the time that Bobby was telling a lie. This area in the center is the cingulate gyrus, known for its error correction functions.
This area of the brain may help the liar monitor what he is saying.
The middle frontal gyrus, an area for storytelling and language functions as well.
Fabricating a story may well put extra demands on this part of the brain.
So each of these areas are active when he was lying to us, and they are not active when he was telling the truth.
These new technologies are in the early stages of development. They've yet to be fully tested in real-life criminal interrogations. Will any of them ever be 100% accurate?
I'm skeptical. I think the MRI is based on a series of assumptions. I don't think it will do any better than the pseudoscientific technologies that have preceded it in ferreting out innocence from guilt, truth-telling from deception based on what's in one's mind, one's brain waves, one's body language. I think the whole endeavor is fraught with error, and we'll never in our lifetimes see the magic technology.
A technology which can detect deception 100% of the time, most believe will always elude us. In the absence of such a technology, we continue to depend on highly skilled interrogators who are dedicated to getting to the truth.
Somebody comes into the room, they know what the truth is, they've made a decision. No matter what happens, I'm not telling the cops the truth. But within a matter of a couple of hours, just sitting there, talk to them, Not only do they tell you the truth, but they write it out for you. It's unbelievably powerful.
The cause of justice is best served by training law enforcement officers in non-coercive interrogation methods, which are based on a profound understanding of human behavior and psychology.